Today I'll be talking about the wireless packet captures with multiple adapters for roaming devices. For devices such as your smartphones, for devices such as network communication devices, such as Vocera. A little bit about myself is, my name is Yer. I have over about 15 years of experience, mostly on the indoor and outdoor, not so much the point-to-point, but more of the metro Wi-Fi stuff back in the day when it was supposed to be popular. So before I get started on some of this, again, I work over at Vocera. Sorry, I am the I'm actually the SME for Vocera tech support. I do a lot of the escalations for cases that comes in, and I ensure customer success. So my day in life is troubleshoot. I troubleshoot anything wireless and everything wireless, whether it be Vocera badges or smartphone devices. And today what I want to talk about is some of the objectives and takeaway here. But before I get to here, this is my second time here, second year. And what I've noticed is that this group here loves to share. And that's what I also like to do. I'm very passionate about sharing. Last year, there was a lot of information that was shared. And I also took in a lot of information that was being shared. So I do appreciate that. So the takeaway and objective for today is wireless packet captures for mobile wireless, voice over wireless LAN. The adapters needed and why. Channel prediction, because it can jump to any AP at any given time. And then the supporting role, which is the logs, the detailed notes, and the spectrum analysis to help you identify and quickly troubleshoot as needed. And I will also go over the data analysis as well using Wireshark. So if you're curious, last year a similar presentation was done by one of my colleagues, Andrew McHale, over at the 2018 Wireless LAN Pro in Prague. Here's the link if you're curious. So what I'm going to talk about here is we're going to start out with a typical common issue of choppy audio with voice devices. Users sometimes will report who, when, and where. It's not all the time that you will get it, but you'll get something, whether it be on time or not. The typical wireless steps to check for that everyone automatically goes to is to check for coverage. Now that's not that it's not correct. It is correct. You should start there. However, there are other stuff that you want to check as well, such as packets, right? So because we can't see packet over the air with our naked eye, we do have the next best thing, which is going to be packets. So with packet captures, they're depicted from the medium side. So they're depicted from over the air, whether if it's wireless packets or if it's on the NIC, right, on the wired. So you'll see it. Packets are vendor neutral, so they don't favor any one vendor. What you see is what you get. But then there are challenges that comes with the wireless packet captures. There's adapter limitation. There are also scanning, right? If you only have one adapter, you're typically scanning from one channel to the other, and therefore you're missing packet. And what's especially hard is for roaming clients, highly mobile devices. Now, for a device such as most of our customers are in the healthcare field, so most of them are in hospitals, and nurses walk really, really fast, and they also walk everywhere. So roaming clients are always going to be the hardest to troubleshoot. So here is a typical common layout of APs within a hospital, and let's just say, for example, that someone was reporting issues here and in the blue dot. And if you go there to try to troubleshoot, the possibility of your client being attached to any one of these APs is possible because the client, based on how it picks its AP or when it gets triggered to probe, it can roam at any given time. So if you go there with one adapter, hoping to capture this, you'll likely have to reconfigure a few times, unless one of the APs here is a dominant AP where the client will typically stick to. Now, given another scenario where if they're reporting an issue and they're roaming, at this point here, capturing one adapter is almost impossible, right? So because you never know when the AP, which AP it's going to choose and what client is going to choose at what point. So what we do, how to solve this, and we do this on a daily basis, is we have something such as this. So this is just a regular laptop with adapters. And the reason for this is because we like to have all the channels covered in our pathway. And it works with the adapters that we have. As you also see, I have a lot of Velcro here. And any laptop can do this, really. It doesn't have to be one of these tablet things. You can actually have it on the front. And I'll explain why we have the client, which is this guy in the middle, attached to so close to it. So is it wasteful? Sometimes, if you consider that, right? But it's better to have and not need and not have, especially when it comes down to trying to capture a particular problem while roaming. And as always, you can always filter on the client later on. So here's a sample of how it works, what's supposed to work. We have one adapter that's attached to, well, let's say this client here is currently attached to channel 36. One of my adapter is already configured, let me stand this up, for channel 36, right? So I don't have to reconfigure any of my adapters. I just keep moving down the line, and say this client roams to another channel, which is going to be on channel 161. I already have adapter attached for that, so I'm covered. And so you get the point. It keeps going down and down. But at some point, you're going to have to run out. You're going to run out of adapters, right? So there's a solution for that. So the hardware setup. A lot of times when I ask customers to do this, or if I go on site, they always ask me the same thing, that they try doing this and it doesn't work because it's either missing packets or the computer crashes or something. So the idea is to have a laptop with 3 separate USB ports with 3 separate buses, right? So don't get the ones that are bunched together. No more than 3 adapters per hub. So I know that you can fit more adapters on there, but then when the test that we've done is the more adapters you have on there, the more packets you'll be missing. The hub needs to have an external power source. So the hub is not just a hub with just the USB adapter that plugs into the laptop. It actually has an additional power barrel that can go in here. Therefore, it actually provides power to the USB hub and your adapters. Otherwise, it'll be draining your battery. And also, I'm using Windows. Windows will start complaining that it's insufficient power. So I always have an external battery that I plug into. It also gives me more runtime when I'm working. So how to capture, pre-planning the packet capture. So these are the stuff that you want to think about before you start to capture, right? So channels to capture, typically what I do is I do a show run config. If I'm something on Cisco, where I would go on to the controller or the AP map itself and take like what the channels that are allowed for one. Channel bandwidth, right? So if you're doing, whether it's 20 megahertz, 40 megahertz, 80 megahertz, 160, make sure adapters supports those channels. And the path that you like to take when you're troubleshooting. Client debugs as well. So, and the reason why I said as needed is because if you're not troubleshooting for authentication problem, right? Let's just say you're choppy audio. Typically, you can bypass in the client debugs, unless you're suspecting that it's the roaming that's causing the choppy audio. And capture at the AP port. This is only good for if you're stationary. You can't really capture at the AP port if you're walking down from point A to point B, because there's going to be a few APs that you'll be bouncing around. So first thing you want to do is planning the channel, right? So first identify your path that you want to take. Here's a typical hospital floor plan. I'm walking from point A to point B because that's where the issues were identified. There's 2 ways to do this, really. Handheld, using an actual, just your Mac or your phone, your Android device, and you walk around. And as someone said earlier, most of the time, the clients are going to pick the highest RSSI they see. At the same time, though, it is going to be your client dependent, right? So, for example, Vocera has a badge that is based off of SNR. This badge is based off of RSSI. So, know your client. That's all I got to say. Walk the path. Note the highest channels that highest power of the channel that you see as you walk your path. You can also use things such as Ekahau or air magnet to do this too. Now, this is only true if you've done the assessment that morning, or because channels can change, right? And if you do this, use this method, just hover your mouse over it, and you'll see the channels that pops up. So in my path here, these are all the APs of the possibilities that this device, whether it be a smartphone or a Vocera device, is likely to attach to. So depending on the channels, you may have enough. For example, a lot of times hospitals, they're using Uni 1 and Uni 3. For some reason, they haven't really discovered Uni 2 yet. But Uni 1 and Uni 3 is only 4 channels, actually 4 channels per uni, right? So except for if you're counting 165, then you have 9 adapters, which I already have. But if they're only using the 8 channels, you already have this covered. You don't ever have to reconfigure your adapters because it's already there. So if I was to capture on all channels, I know it's hard to see the channels there, but then I would actually already pre-configure my adapters as such to identify that. And I could actually walk around the entire hospital for this. So if you have, let's say if they are using Uni 2 and or Uni 2 extended, that's over 20-something channels, 24 channels. You would likely have to stop where you exhaust all your channels and reconfigure if you haven't gotten to your path yet. However, if what you covered is sufficient within your the issue where it was reported, then this is sufficient with what you're doing. Otherwise, you would have to reconfigure your adapters, and you have to stop your captures doing that. So the setup part of it, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. I'm using OmniPeak here. Just remember that you select the primary channels that you need to. In the case that I was talking about is usually the 20 megahertz, but on here, if your adapters support in or AC, then just remember to select the correct one. Some of the test scenarios that I do, a lot of times when I'm on site troubleshooting, or if I'm asking the customer to troubleshoot, collect data for me, there are 2 scenarios. One is going to be a solo or an assisted. A solo meaning you're the only person out on the field doing the assessment or the troubleshooting, and you need a way to figure this out on how to stream the data as well as try to reproduce the issue, basically. One way to do it is to have a device set up in an area where you know they have good coverage and not choppy out in that particular area. And you can actually stream audio from one area while you're out there in the field to mimic a nurse call, nurse-to-nurse call. Otherwise, if you're by yourself, what you can do is have 2 devices on you. Wear one or put one in your pocket, depending on what type of device you have, and keep one close by while streaming audio from one device, and you're listening to the other one. Therefore, I know that both devices are likely going to be on the same AP, but that kind of will tell you if that area really is problematic or if it's the other area of the other end, I should say. Assisted is pretty much the same way. You have somebody in an area where it's good, and they give you feedback, right? So having an assistant do that is always going to be a bit more interactive, because you'll get a lot of feedback as to that was bad, this is good, and so forth. So earlier I talked about having the device near the adapters. It's because a lot of times you want to have the perspective of the device, not the perspective of anything else, right? So therefore, if this device is talking to a particular AP at the same time, and the customer says, well, I don't have a coverage issue. Everything is great. My heat map looks green. But at the same time, if you're capturing packets and the device is complaining that it's below neg 65 or below neg 70, these adapters can help back you up. Because the packets that are coming in, these guys are picking it up at this perspective, right? So it's not apples for apples per se, but then it's close enough to the point where you know that this device is getting either a low coverage, or if it really is, something else that's wrong with it. So here is an example of a device log on your left, and a packet capture on the right of the same trace, right? So I recorded the two, and as I said, they're not apples for apples, but they're in the same particular range for the RSSI. So some of the packet capture logistics that you have to be aware of is the ring buffers, or the size of it, basically. Sometimes you can capture too much and maybe your hard drive is not enough and you kill your hard drive or something. Or sometimes you can capture big files that when you try to analyze these without using like a EdiCap, it's so large that you can't do it on the fly. You would have to just take it home or take it back to your office and do the analysis there. So what you want to do is you want to consider perhaps maybe even using a ring buffer, right? If you're not doing a whole lot of if you're doing a continuous capture and you're not reproducing the issue right away, or you want to partition the file sizes. So Wireshark does this, OmniPeak does this. You can actually partition to say stop at 100 megabytes and start a new capture. Therefore, it's small chunks for you to analyze right away. Consider that the issue may be at the other side of the end of the call as well. So not just because somebody reported here, that doesn't necessarily mean that when he or she was in that area, the other person wasn't having the issue. And another thing to consider is if you want to decrypt these traces, right, you have to capture from a full association. I typically just reboot the device and let it come back on the network versus trying to roam with this thing, and it'll capture that. So tools consideration. Both tools are very, very powerful tools. I don't favor one over the other. So with OmniPeak, it's a license fee, right? You have to pay an annual contract fee to use this. However, the adapters are cheaper. So let's say if you go out on a customer site and you lose an adapter or you bang into a wall or something, you can easily get these adapters replaced at a cheaper expense. Wireshark is free. However, the PCAP adapters are more expensive. Right, so they run, if you're using the classic, which is 2.4, it's like $300. The NX adapters are, I don't know how much they are now these days, but $1,500 or so. At Vocera, we decided to use OmniPeak to capture the wireless packet while we use Wireshark to do the analysis. And I don't know if it's still true today, but one of the reasons why we chose to do that was because, for one, we have a lot of field employees or field engineers who utilizes OmniPeak. Packet captures, and therefore, it's really not really cost effective to give everybody 9 adapters of the PCAP adapters. So we go for OmniPeak. At the same time, I think there was something that's about the short guard intervals of Wireshark, right? The PCAP adapter is not supporting. And I'll talk about why we use Wireshark for analysis in a little bit too. So the supporting data gather, this is going to help you expedite your troubleshooting time. The spectrum analyzer, it helps you see what the RF is like. The client logs, seeing it from the perspective of the client itself, which is always going to be useful. And notes. Having detailed notes is always going to be great, whether you're out on site to do the analysis or if you're trying to get the customer or one of your engineers to gather the data for you. Note what, where, if it's static, if it's roaming, is it reproducible on demand, the time, and who. Right? Not so much the username itself, but MAC address. Therefore, because you'll likely need the MAC address to filter on your focus. So here's a quick example of correlating data, why it's needed and why it's important. So this is a client log saying that all you know is that it's reporting missed beacon and it's disconnected due to link loss and it's going to retry again. That's all you know. If this is all you have, you don't have much to go off from. But if you have a correlating packet capture, you can see why it was reporting the same thing, right? So at this point here, we saw that channel utilization was really high. But this doesn't drill down to the root cause. It just tells me what the badge is already complaining of, and it just kind of supports that. However, with the spectrum analyzer, you can see that at a certain point, it fluctuates on a 5 gigahertz, that it can actually jam up the entire thing. And this is actually a real incident out in the OR. We found that there was a HDMI extender that was wireless, and not only were they complaining about the Vocera badges, but the surgeons that were trying to stream Pandora while they open you up, they were complaining that they were losing connectivity as well. So, and it's because every single time they kicked on this thing, this little device, it actually jams up the entire channel. So data analysis example, we'll talk about some of the common issues with choppy audio. I know there's other stuff such as roaming, but I think with this session that I have here, I don't have time to go through everything. So I'm going to go over what it looks like in the packet capture and some of the common root causes. So before we dive in, this is one of the reasons why we utilize Wireshark to do our analysis. As you can see, we can create profiles. And what these profiles contains are things such as coloring rules. Right? These coloring rules can help us quickly identify at the packet view what each packet means instead of me having to read it. Now, there's a deep dive that I took in this conference last year, a class by James Geringer. It's about the Wireshark deep dive, and he actually goes through all of this in great detail. So I don't know if it's still here this year, but if it is, I think a lot of you will benefit from it if you're not into Wireshark or don't know a whole lot about Wireshark yet. So the color profiles can help the eye focus on some of the areas that it's needed. And at the same time, we use macros to create filters. So instead of having to type out the entire MAC address and what exactly that I'm looking for, we shorten these up to macros. And we can just type in something very quickly, such as this, BART, and then the last 6 characters of the MAC address of the client that we're looking for. And this actually doesn't pertain only to Vocera badges, right? We can use this on smartphones, whether it be iOS or Android. Anyway, with this macro, we just type this in quickly, and it spits out all that I really am looking for. In this case here, it shows me all the to and from destination. So now that you managed to capture choppy audio with multiple adapters, what do you do now, right? The next thing you want to do is you want to filter on that particular MAC using the macros that you just created. Therefore, you're not paying attention to any other thing. Of course, you want to start here, and then you want to drill on the outside. But even then, this requires you to go through line by line for the adapters, for the packet. And it takes a lot of time to go through a lot of this, because let's say if you have a minute worth of capture, that's a lot of lines to go through just for this. So one thing I want to note too is I know that I'm using legacy here. You can actually use the newer version of Wireshark, and it'll color code certain ones on the sidebar so you can zoom in. However, what we do is we utilize the IO graphs. And as I said, with OmniPeak, we don't have this flexibility, right? But with Wireshark, we have this flexibility to actually manipulate certain data points for us to quickly identify the issue. So for this one here, I know that they would user would say, I have choppy audio. Here's the packet capture. They don't tell me when, they don't tell me where, they don't tell me anything. So what I can do is I can plot this in for what I want to see. And what I actually have here in the lines are that the black line is the audio going upstream to the DS. Blue line is audio coming downstream from the DS. Red lines are the retries upstream. Pink bars are the retries for downstream. And I graph these separately so I can see how often they're being retried, because keep in mind, this is choppy audio. So what I've done here is I looked at it from a high level, right? So then I can quickly drill in to say, I don't need to look at the 45-second mark because it looks pretty normal to me. But areas such as the 80-second mark, 60-second mark, they're being high retries, and that's usually a common sign for choppy audio. So I can quickly double-click on it, and it'll take me exactly to where the packet retries are. And I can see that from a perspective of upstream retries, it's pretty high, downstream, and so forth. Notice that the RSSI is somewhat decent. It's not great, but it's not bad. But then the issue here was really because of the priority, right? The customer didn't set the DSCP. Actually, they had CAC on, and because the client doesn't support CAC, it didn't allow it to transmit at the voice priority and kicked it back down to best effort. So as soon as we disable CAC, because if you turn on fast lane, sometimes it automatically enables CAC. So if you disable CAC, it actually makes the device, because it's already sending out a DSCP of 46, it bumps it up to voice priority. And that was the fix for this issue. Some of the other potential root causes for choppy audio, it could be coverage, as we mentioned earlier, right? So just make sure that you have sufficient coverage in areas where you are utilizing the voice over wireless LAN devices, and interference and congestion as well. So consider that. Believe it or not, we still have a lot of customers on the 2.4, which we always tell them to stay away from, but they seem to like it a lot. And it causes a lot of problem. And implement QoS, right? So trust the DSCP value from end to end. Don't strip off anything. So in summary, what we talked about was wireless packet captures, adapters, the amount of adapters, why it's needed. We talked about channel prediction on the path. And then we talked about some of the additional logs that can help you troubleshoot and expedite the turnaround time for troubleshooting. And then we also talked about the data analysis. So again, one of the things that I love about this conference here is to share ideas. Feel free to come and ask me. Feel free to give me your thoughts about this, right? Because I think within all of us here, we all have something in common, which is troubleshooting. We all love to share ideas, and to better one by sharing ideas, we can all benefit from that. So that's all I got for you guys. Thank you.